Hello, this is Natasha Castle and welcome to the Artist Chat Room where we talk and do art kind of stuff. I hope you enjoyed last week's video, which is where I showed you what I got in my sketchbox, my favourite sketchbox to date. I am looking forward to the next one. It hasn't come yet. I live in Australia and it takes a little bit longer to get here, but I had said that I would work back into the zigzag book that I had, because at the beginning of it there was that swatch that I did and I didn't like the way it jarred against the painting I did when I was on location. And so I thought I'll come back, I'll clean that up, you'll see. And I worked back into it. I didn't do a lot, but it's amazing how little made me feel a lot better about the work I had done. So let's dive straight into this. Okay, so I did video me gessoing that first 2 pages where I had the swatching on before, but I thought, what's the point of you guys watching me put gesso on paper? That was a waste of probably 3 minutes of my time, or I should say 3 minutes of your time. So what I'm doing now is I got out my Neo colors, Neo 2s, and I'm getting in there and putting in some definition in some of those trees that were kind of set back a little bit on the hill there. I've pulled out some different greens, muted greens and some browns, and I wanted to also give definition to the, I don't know if you call that the horizon line, but where the lake, it was not a lake, a little river there that was coming in. Not sure if in the end, especially in the video, if you can notice that it's actually a reflection of the mountains and the trees and the water right there. But yeah, so I'm getting in there, I'm putting in some of the green that was up in the trees and the water because I wanted it to read a little bit more like a reflection. And the trunks of the trees, I wanted them to come in as well, get that reflection thing happening from, but not strong reflection. I didn't want a strong reflection. I kind of struggled with some of these colors that I was using because they weren't quite the right color, so I had to add a kind of like other colors, add a few colors together to get it to work. And you'll see later on I get in there some, I think some orange or yellow to tone down those colors. If you want to know how to subdue, to make your colors a little bit more muted, the best thing to do is to use a complementary color. So if it's for green, you would use red. You can actually use brown because brown can be, when it's a reddy brown, you can use browns. You can use super warm oranges. There's all different kind of colors, not colors, but colors within that spectrum that you could use. But see, even now, yeah, you can see I'm like, nah, that's just too different a color to what's there. And so I'm trying to tone it down by using the orange color. It's also bringing some of that dark areas. It didn't work. I thought it would work using a bit on my brush, but because the paper was wet, then I rubbed the Neo 2 on the paper and it worked a lot better. I was quite happy with that. I like how the darkness of the depth of the trees was reflected in the water, and that was nice. Also nice to have an area that's a bit darker and areas that are lighter. That dark forest there feels thick and heavy, and those mountains in the background feel light and airy, and that's kind of a cool juxtaposition to have in your artwork. As if you don't know, what I did last week was I took this concertina zigzaggy kind of sketchbook on location, and I used watercolors that all came, both the concertina book and the watercolors from a sketchbox. which is a subscription that you can get, and they send you different materials to test out, which has been great because it's where I tested out pan pastels. Now my mind's gone blank, so I can't think of any other things, but there was lots of different tools and mediums, including like lino cutting materials and inks and ink markers and alcohol markers, which isn't something that I'm about, but I have been able to share them with my students my teenage class students at the art school, and they love those sort of things. So you can see I've moved over to those bushes a little bit further back. I'm not going to want them to be quite as dark as these ones that are here, but I also want to show the shadows and brightness in the trees again. Get that orange in there, mute down, muddy up that green a little bit, and it'll feel more true to the colours that were there. As mentioned earlier, just as we started, how I went and gessoed those first 2 pages, and I did that mainly because the swatches I took of the watercolours were incredibly saturated and really jarred with this kind of muted natural tones. Not that they're all really that muted or that natural, but it was compared to the high saturation. Now, looking at this now, I feel like I've gotten too dark in that area, but as I said, I don't want this whole piece to have all kind of one tone. I want there to be areas of light and areas of darkness, because if it was all kind of in the middle ground or light to medium, it wouldn't feel quite so, I don't know what the word is, quite so interesting, because it's tonal variation that makes things interesting, and I've got a couple of videos on that. Now I used kind of a greeny grey blue here, and as I'm putting it on, I'm like, nah, don't like this compared to the other colours. But I finish it off, and then I come back later and you'll see that. Again, get that orange in, mute down. That is that proper language? I don't think it is, but tone down, that's another word. But so I'm moving over, and you can see as it was quite detailed in comparison earlier, and now it's gotten less and less information. This time I thought I'll go back. The reason why that happened was the day was progressing, and I just wanted to have some kind of notation of what was happening there before I packed up and went home. When I said the day was progressing, it was more like the rain was starting to come, and I had to get out of there, unfortunately, before the rain came. It was a bit of a gloomy day, but yeah. This time I started with the orange because I remembered there was a fair bit of like rocks, and it was a little bit of a drop down into the water here. So I thought I'd do something where in the other ones I started with the green. This time I went straight into the orange. There were these trees that were leaning over, and they were quite interesting, and the way I put them down was really more like a shorthand approach. And so now I'm putting in just a little bit more detail to show that, hey, these are, trunks of trees, very thin trunks, no wider than one's wrist, and then some bushes. And not sure why they were leaning over. I think the way the wind blew often in that area. I'm not sure. So now I want to give a bit more rocks and definition to this. I think that's the last bit of when I say last bit, that's the last page of my Zigzag concertina sketchbook. Those rocks are way too brown, chestnut brown, and rocks are very rarely chestnut brown. Often they're actually grey. But it's all wet, so I have to move, and you might see I move to one side, then I come back and I go over again, mainly because it is wet from washing down the Neo 2s. Neo 2s, if you did not know, are water-solubles. I'm sure most of you know. Now I've pulled out my Prismacolors, and with my Prismas I'm getting in there and just adding a little bit. When I say detail, it's not highly detailed. It's just to give another texture, another layer, to give the illusion. And I even go above the trees a little bit with the lighter colour. Some of those areas that I want a bit darker, I get in there. I had more options with my Prismas because I have 72 Prismas, so that's a nice big box, and not quite like the Neos where I'm a little bit limited. I think I've got, how many Neos do I have here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. 40 Neos, but still somehow it feels a little bit more limited than the Prisma does, even though it's still a fair amount. And you can see I'm just kind of very loosely putting some foliage lines, and even here it's some of it goes above there. That's where I'm going above the actual foliage that's there. Some of those lines you don't actually notice. It's interesting how these things do add a richness and extra texture and extra pizzazz. I don't know if it's very pizzazzy, that's probably the wrong word to use, but something a little bit extra definition, extra information that your mind actually registers without it being, oh, look at those lines that person do. And sometimes some people actually do notice it. I didn't like that bit there, and I'm like, it just needs something a little bit interesting there. So I thought there were some areas of some reeds, kind of long grassy kind of stuff. Not reeds in the water, but some long grass, and I thought I'll put that there. It was actually a bit of a going down slope embankment-y thingy, so wanted to give it a little bit of its own little moment just there, and having different variety of greens and different heights helped, and even different directions that the grass is going in. The yellow is for the lights. Sometimes you might want a lighter green, and you might think, oh, I'll add white to my colour and that'll make it lighter, but what you actually need to do is add a bit of yellow to give it that hint like the sun is shining and catching some of the light on the grass. I went back in a little bit with some Neos there, and now I've gone with the pencil for the rocks that go across the river. Thinking back now, maybe I didn't need to go all the way across and let some be faded. It's really important to have different textures, different variations. I'm adding some little rocks, which is good, but I could have had some lighter and some darker. That would have been good. There was a bit of a water drop, waterfall, not much of a waterfall, probably a metre or half a metre, and I kind of tried to do that there, but there wasn't enough white, so I kind of gave up on that. And again, a little bit showing the flow of the water, so it's not just the watercolour doing it. Having another pencil is some thin lines over the top of those little washes that I put, which I think I put right at the end, those little washes. So it's kind of nice to put some of them in. add a little bit more movement in the water, because the water was actually moving quite a bit on that day. How are we going? Yep. Give those rocks, darken up those rocks. Remember I said just a few minutes ago that it was too wet. Now it's dry enough. And well, I hope it was dry enough. I noticed that a couple of times when I went into some of the spots, it wasn't quite dry enough. Working on that foliage up in the trees, trying to get some more textures up there, some lights and brights, because that is a lighter area, though I don't mind having that trunk a little bit darker. Gives it kind of like a bookend to that picture. I like that tree with that really muddy green at the top. That's quite nice. You get some of those branches a little bit more defined. Now I'm having a bit of a look. What do I do? How do I feel about this? It's really important to kind of almost come back. Here I go with the pencil, and you can see that green is very different to that blue-grey that I had done those pine trees. And it has knocked back some of that blue-green. It's not green like the pencil, but it has knocked back some of that blue-green. Going back, seeing what I think. Okay, so I think late I noticed I made a mistake. I should have put that gessoed area a little bit more into the view, and I apologize for that. I think I was so in the zone of the making that I wasn't thinking about where the camera was and what the camera was doing. Yeah, I started with the pencils, drew a bit in, and then I thought, oh, those pencils aren't going to give me what I want. I did think about just having pencil marks showing the rest of it, just kind of like a contour drawing thing, but then I thought, oh no, the colours, I want them to kind of spill out a little bit. The problem became that because I'm using Neo colours not on watercolour paper now. Yes, it is watercolour paper, but it was watercolour paper that I then gessoed over the top. And so the way the gesso kind of pulled, I didn't like that. And you can see that I had to actually press pause a few times and get the hairdryer and move the lines around a little bit, because I wanted to really, not the lines, but move the pigment on the gesso. I did like what happened when I did that, but again, I don't like that from the gesso part to the other part, that sudden stop, almost like a triangle going out. Allowing the bottom bit to dry, getting a bit of a kind of a tealy blue for the sky. I'm not sure if you can really notice the two differences of the blues and greens that I've got happening. I wanted a hint of sky. So here I go again with that Neo colour. Want to give it some more of that darker coming in. Yeah, so I am so sorry. This came off the page. But can you see how I'm kind of twisting the Neo colour as I'm drawing it on? I did the whole tree like that, where I kind of twisted as I went on. And that gives you a slightly unpredictable line. And unpredictable lines are great because they feel more natural, because trees aren't predictable. And I apologize that that's off the page. I do eventually notice it, but not until after the tree is complete. The yellow up in the mountains there that I've got is where the sun is kind of hitting, the light is hitting the mountains, and that's probably my favourite part in the whole sketchbook, actually, those two mountains and that kind of very distant one further back. So I do use Neo colours for this. I come back with a brown. I think I started off with that grey Neo colour too that I got in the sketchbox, but now I've come back with a grey. Yeah, this is where I noticed what I was doing. I did go over it with my water brush over that tree, and as you can see, it just doesn't come out on the gessoed page in the same way, which is interesting. Don't think that that's a bad thing. It can be a really cool effect that you can get, so I don't mind that kind of thing, but be aware that if you're going to gesso a page and then do your Neo 2s and then use water to turn it into a liquid pigment, it will dry weirdly is the only way I'm going to describe it. I kind of wish you saw how it was a little bit weird. You might see it when I do that little triangle bit. Yeah, I wanted to, sometimes I get in like a walnut or an orange colour in the trees, because that's that warmth. Yeah, you've got like the burnt umber or the raw umber kind of colour coming through, but then when you have a bit of a walnut colour, it just adds a little bit of warmth, and I wanted to add a little bit of warmth to the tree, like the sun hitting it, or the light is just different. Getting that hill that I've got on one side, bringing it over. I think I should have just left that without watering it down, but I do water it down, even though it does react differently from one side to the other. I did want to bring that because I felt before it was too light, and that's now made it stand out. Now I've got that green that I wanted to bring across, so it wasn't like that triangle, sudden triangle there. And that's where you can kind of see a little bit how it goes a little funny, but yeah, and that's it there. I hope you enjoyed seeing how I did this. It was a lot of fun to do on the day and fun to do now, and yeah. Hey, I hope you enjoyed seeing how I was able to elevate the drawing I had done using both Neo 2s and Prisma pencils, also gessoing that beginning and making some kind of a extension to my landscape. That wasn't what was there, it was just out of imagination, as I said earlier. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, give it a thumbs up, and I'll look forward to seeing you again here next week. Bye for now.